Charlie Bosco. Welcome to The Winning Mentality, the podcast getting the stories behind sporting success. Now, Tony Smith, the former England, Warrington, Leeds rugby league coach, has been a previous guest on this podcast. And since I chatted to him, we've had a lot of people asking about his work that he mentioned last time as a consultant, an advisor, just a sounding board for other managers and coaches. And as such, we thought we'd get him onto the podcast for a second time to delve into his recent work a bit more. So whether you're an aspiring coach, already a successful leader in almost any discipline, or just someone like me who's interested in the world of top-level sport, this is a fascinating insight. It's ostensibly a podcast about sport, obviously, but really this is a conversation about life and people. Tony's got an inside view on the high-pressure world of sporting leadership, and just about everybody will learn a thing or two from the next 45 minutes. Tony, welcome back to the podcast. Sorry I'm not sitting in your beautiful home overlooking the Yorkshire Dales.
That's fine, mate. You're welcome anyway.
And I hear Britain's experiencing something of a heatwave.
It's ridiculous at the moment. It's so nice. It's been in my 18 years that I've lived in this country, it's certainly been the best summer and weather leading up to summer in terms of sunshine and warmth and after a pretty harsh winter, really. So, yeah, we've had the good and the bad up here in the hills of Yorkshire.
And we spoke in April and you were out of rugby league, possibly slightly out of love with it. You've been watching the game much? You getting the itch a bit?
No, I haven't watched any local rugby league. I did watch the second State of Origin in Australia yesterday. I missed the first one, but State of Origin usually attracts me. It attracts a lot of people. It is a massive, massive part of the rugby league calendar in all parts of the world. But I tuned into that. But no, I sadly say that I haven't been missing it, and being away from it probably makes me appreciate it a bit more when I do return, I'd say.
Oh, you think that there will be a return at some stage?
Oh, to watch, I would think so. As to whether I go back in career-wise, I'm doubtful. But what's the saying? Never say never. But certainly. I think my interest will come back in some respects, depending on how the style of rugby league is being played. And, I think it's in history shown that it goes through different transformations and different stages. And, I'm probably not in love with the stage that it's going through at the moment. It's all pretty much the same and predictable. But, when that change happens, I'm sure I'll get drawn back into it in some way, shape or form as a spectator.
Well, I spoke to Peter Fox, one of your ex-players, last week, and he said you're the best coach he's ever worked under, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of neutrals, myself included, hoping that we do see you back one day.
Oh, well, thank you. I've got no burning desire at this stage, as I expressed last time, but, it's... I'm enjoying doing other things, Charlie, at this stage, and I'm learning a lot. And I think, when you learn and when you probably test yourself a little bit or take yourself out of the comfort zone, I think it sparks something in you, and that's certainly how I have been lately. I'm very stimulated in terms of learning about other sports and other cultures in other sports, and it fascinates me. So. Yeah, we'll see what happens. But he was a lovely young bloke, Peter, and it was very kind of him to say such nice words.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if you're giving me cash or wire transfer or whatever, but I think it's 500, wasn't it?
I think I must have psychologically affected him and maybe hypnotised him or something, and he speaks those words. No, it was quite interesting, actually. In my time that I coached Peter, he didn't actually play first grade when I was at the Leeds Rhinos. He was a young, late comer to the sport, and he probably was learning his trade when I was there, and it's when I left that he probably played most of his first grade rugby league, and then he made a transfer to another club. And as it happens, I did call him up into the train-on squad for England at one stage. So he progressed a whole lot after I finished coaching him. So, all credit to somebody else probably there, and Peter himself. He probably thrived better when I wasn't coaching him, but it was very nice of him to say those words. I hope he learned a little bit under my tenure.
Oh, it certainly sounded like it. And you mentioned then about learning, and since we talked, a few people have asked me, both email, contact@thewinningmentality.com if you want to get in touch, but also friends of mine have asked, they were very interested in what you've been doing since Rugby League with your work with the LMA. You mentioned the League Managers Association and various other coaches, and I wanted to delve into that a little bit more and ask how that's progressed since then.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm involved in, they're trying to, with the LMA, the League Managers Association, got a new program going where it's more one-on-one contact with their members, and they've taken a few of us on to do that, and some are in the medical background and making sure that medically that the managers are in fine form and or accessible to what they need, and having tests, cardiac tests and full fitness screenings, and making sure that they're in good shape. They've also got psychological support of a professional nature there if need be, and they've also got somebody who specialises in helping people with gain employment and organise themselves in terms of organising their CVs and getting them ready to also get ready for interviews and practice and organise themselves and also gain the confidence in applying for jobs, and I suppose that's a little bit where I come in as well for those managers who are unemployed, that I can go and talk to them about encouraging them to just pick up the phone or knock on a door and go and seek your next job, because when you're sitting at home and waiting for the phone to ring, it won't ring. You've got to pick it up yourself and make things happen. So I delve into a little bit of that, but also some of the younger managers in particular that are starting out. I've got some experiences, although it be in a different sport, that I can pass on that they're interested in, and there's some of them are of similar nature to what I've experienced, and some of them are quite different, and they've got some quite unique experiences in football and challenges that they've got to overcome. But it's nice to have somebody that they can bounce some things off, or ask a little bit of advice, or just have a talk about, and sometimes get off their chest.
Well, I mean, you've mentioned that both times we've spoken, you've talked about how you're still learning. So I suspect the answer to this question will be a lot. But if you look back to when you started coaching, can you pinpoint what you wish you'd known, or what you wish someone had put their arm around your shoulder and said?
Yes and no. You've just got to experience it. And I remember I'm working for my brother as an assistant coach, and I was getting to the stage where I felt like I wanted to be a head coach, and he just said to me, you just got to experience some of it. You can do as much apprenticeship and it's good to do an apprenticeship under somebody who's got experience, and somebody who can pass on some of their experiences to you, and some of their knowledge and some of their mistakes, that they've experienced. But there's still it's a big leap. It's a big leap from going from an assistant to head coach or manager, and the problems that you face are going to be unique too, and that goes each year of my coaching. There was never a year where there weren't circumstances that arose that weren't new. So it's a really tough one to answer, as you said, Charlie, because each and every year that you coach, it's unique. You get a different combination of people or a different challenge, and and there's a lot of good things out there that can prepare you to become a good head coach, but it's still down to handling it when it happens to you. It's or while it's happening around you, thinking on your feet, being able to make adjustments, all those aspects make a good coach as well. So as much as we try to pass on our knowledge and wisdom to each other, and that's how we learn as coaches, there's always that uniqueness and that of the circumstances that are happening to somebody along the way. And so there's a lot of things I wish I had known, but it's not until after you experience them that you go, oh, I wish I had have experienced that before, because usually when you experience them the second time, you handle them better. That's for most things in life, I would suggest.
I think I'd agree with that, yeah. But, I mean, it always strikes me when people become head coaches, what an overwhelming task it must be, because you were a fan of culture and the players shook hands every day. That was one of your things, right?
I said hello every day.
Right.
I didn't, and when I say, and that doesn't sound too unique, but no, I made not a formal, but I made a point of each day going around and looking somebody in the eye and saying good morning, or g'day, how you doing, and how's things, and I didn't necessarily shake hands, but I did mention to you in our last interview that I know of people or coaches or managers who have done the handshake each day, and I respect that too. But my point was that I actually, took time out to say hello, and not all managers, not all leaders, not all bosses do that, and I think it's a really important part of being part of a team.
Yeah, just the reason I ask is I was just thinking you've got to create a culture. We're always hearing about if you take care of the culture, the results take care of themselves, and you've also got to keep an eye on the academy, and you've got to make sure that all the support staff are happy, and you've actually got to coach the team, and you've got to sign new players and let players go and negotiate contracts and organise tactics. I mean, that's, I'm sure, 1% of your responsibilities. It's just such an overwhelming amount of work. Is part of your job getting people to prioritise or delegate or in some way handle the workload?
Absolutely, yeah. And coaching is about prioritising, because you can't fix everything. I mean, you can't practice everything that you'd like to. On a weekly basis or a yearly basis, you not as much as you would like. There isn't enough time and hours in the day. So it is, coaching and managing is a whole lot about prioritising and working out what's needed now or what's needed next. Certainly delegation is part of that too. And I think, as you become more experienced in your job, and, sometimes you have the luxuries of having, a lot of good support around you. You find it easier to delegate as well. But when you're starting out, often you feel like you've got to do everything yourself, and and probably rightfully so when you start off. You've got to make sure things are done the way that you want. But certainly, as I got more experienced, I got I delegated a whole lot more and trusted the people around me a whole lot more, I suppose, and gave over responsibility to people. And I think that's all part of developing as a manager and coach. But certainly, prioritisation is a huge part of the job, or any sort of leadership. Not just managing or coaching, but any leadership. You can't touch everything as much as often as you would like. So, you've got to touch on it as it's needed, if you like. But, I think that's better coaches recognise what needs to be done, and make that the priority. And I think that's the challenge.
Well, what does need to be done? Because if you have a manager that goes into a football club I mean, what's the average tenure? It's less than 2 years, I guess. I mean,
Oh,
it's
yeah,
it's
yeah.
very short. So what do you encourage them to do? Do you just say to them,
Well,
take care of the culture, or do you say, look, just make sure you win on that first Saturday because then you're off to a good start and you might buy yourself some time? I mean, what is the priority?
well, that seems to be the approach by most. They've just got to try and get a couple of W's or a couple of wins next to their team's name as quick as they can, because it is just so volatile. And you're right, it varies in different divisions how long the average tenure is, and it's quite alarming really, because it's, as anybody would know, in any sort of business or walk of life, it usually takes time to build anything that's worthwhile, and often, they don't get a chance to build anything worthwhile. So it's a lot of judgments are made on whether it's the W or the L or the D next to the match report. So unfortunately, that's the way it is. But creating culture takes time. It's a very difficult thing to do quickly, but you need to get in and get buy-in from your players, convince your players about having a good culture and how important that is, not just in the immediate but the longer term. And but often football is very short-sighted in some of its decision making, particularly at administration level. I think players and managers would like to have more longevity or the capability to build something, but it's very judgmental and it's very volatile, and I think there's a lot of response to supporters, and sometimes the supporters don't understand some of what it takes to create something special, and a little bit of hurt along the way, because there's not many people that I know that have been successful that haven't had some hurt along the way before they get there. And it's just riding that out and being able to ride out some of that hurt usually gives you a chance to build something that's worthwhile. And it's volatile. They've got some real obstacles in football. It is a real eye-opener for me to see just how volatile it is and how difficult and some of the obstacles. So listen, Charlie, I don't profess to have the answers for all these guys. All I can try and do is give them some support and give them some encouragement to try and build something worthwhile along the way. But certainly it's, initially it's trying to get those wins on the board for them. That's important in that sport. But I think we see some really good young managers go by the wayside because they're not given the opportunity to actually build a culture, and that's a shame. They're missing out on some really good talent.
And how does the pressure manifest itself? I mean, I guess we can all see on a Saturday you're getting abused by the fans, but you've been a coach, and like you said, with most managers, you've had ups and you've had downs and losing streaks and winning streaks. How does the pressure manifest itself day to day? Are you having meetings with the board, or do people stop talking to you, or do you get... I mean, how does it work? Do the people that serve your lunch, do they sort of not look you in the eye because they think you might be gone next week? I mean, how does it feel day to day?
Yeah, hopefully not. It's not, I haven't had to feel that too often. And usually the people around you and understand the circumstances that, or are quite sympathetic towards you, in terms of, working relationships and those sort of things. So, people involved usually are pretty understanding and supportive on the whole. That's not the case in all places, and there'd be various experiences for different managers in different ways. But, fortunately, I've had some pretty, supportive people around me that I've worked for. I've had decent people I've worked for, and that's not always the case. Some people, don't get that support from their management and do get put under pressure and do get, questioned or or snubbed in terms of not talking, and that's why I talk about the importance of managers managing up. It's not just managing players; it's managing the administration and the owners and the hierarchy and the board, and it's important to keep them informed and understand the circumstances of what the team is going through. Not excuse making, but just being real about the situation. And most rational and reasonable people, when they're given an explanation, will understand that. But I still think social media plays a huge part nowadays. It's changed the landscape of a lot of people within sport. I think it's somewhat in a positive way and some in a negative way also. So there's a lot of power to the people out there, and it's they vote in numbers and sometimes convince each other rather than understanding the circumstances of what a team or a club is going through. And that's why it's so important to put out the right messages also by managers and coaches to the media and through the media to get fans to understand what's going on within the club, and that's really important too.
And you've mentioned administrators a couple of times. Do you have access to many administrators in clubs? Can you go to them and say, look, I've been a coach, I've been where this guy is at right now, and you need to understand the situation and explain it to them? Do you have access to them?
Not at this stage, and I'm relatively new to this, to this sport and what I'm doing too. I've met a few along the way, but not to the degree where I've got a sort of relationship where I can go in and explain that. But some of the circumstances, but who knows? In time, I may well develop some of those sort of relationships. I hope I do, but and I think that's really important. I think that's a really important way of trying to change some of what goes on within that sport, in particular football, and get some understanding through, say, the either the football manager or the CEOs within clubs, and to understand, or general managers, to understand what goes on behind the scenes in terms of preparation for the team, or what circumstances are going on within the team, so as then they can talk to owners and the people who probably hire and fire, and get them to convince the people at the top, the very, very top, who make the decisions about sacking managers, to understand that it's not necessarily the best solution. I think it's an easy solution, I'm going to say, but it's not always the solution. Sometimes, well, most of the time, if you've recruited well, you've got the right person, and there's no point in changing it, because the circumstances aren't going to change until some culture is changed within the place, and that takes time to do, as we talked about. But I think it's really important to educate the administrators, people within the administration, who then can, educate the people who own the clubs, and I think that's very, very important.
And what about the fans? I mean, is there some way that the LMA could... I know the LMA works hard, but could they work harder at saying to the fans, look, here's the proof that if you have a manager for a long time, you have more prolonged success. It's a very clear line. Hiring, firing doesn't really work. I mean, what can the LMA do to win not win the fans over, but educate them and say, there's no point getting rid of this guy after 10 months?
I'm not sure that it's their role necessarily to do that on behalf of the managers. What the LMA does, and does very well, is educates their members on and how important it is for them to put out the right sort of messages, and it gives them a lot of education and access to how to and ways of training the managers either to use social media in a really positive way, and there's some managers who do that very, very well. I'm not a big social media person myself, but there are some managers who do use it and do use it very, very well. And there's also the use of the media and the messages that you put out. Some of them are to the fans, some of them are to the management, some of them are to your opponents in some respects. But the importance of what you say when you say things publicly is massive, and I think it's the role of the LMA to help managers understand those things and give them examples of how that's good, can be done in good, and how it can be done not so good, and some experiences of people that haven't handled it very well. And I think it's more, the LMA is more about preparing the managers to do their job well, rather than go out and be the spokesperson of all the managers in the public, if you understand that sort of the difference there.
No, so I mean, I think it's interesting what you've just said, and I'm interested how you would want a manager to speak. I mean, the example that springs to mind is Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool. When he arrived, I think it was for the first 2 years, he didn't have a better record than his predecessor, and yet he was still held up as the great hope, and it was almost deemed inevitable that under him Liverpool would succeed. And it is paying off now, but at least for a couple of years, there was no discernible difference in results. But what there was a difference in is this huge charisma of this guy, and every time he speaks, you want to listen. What should managers be saying? How do you get the fans and the football community on side?
Well, there's all sorts of different ways, but positivity is usually a pretty good one. Honesty is usually another pretty good one to get people involved. But, people like positive and upbeat people, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people would back me up on that, but they also like honesty. They don't like it on a nonsense, but spoken, and, too much jargon, and we all get guilty of that because sometimes we've got to protect our players and we can't say exactly how we're feeling as managers, and some of those things have got to be done, how we're feeling behind closed doors. I find it fascinating. I love listening to managers after games and post games and reports and, or interviews on TV. And, often you can hear different messages from different managers, and Klopp's a great one at it, but various other managers in various sports. And you can almost hear the message of, that's for the fans, that's for the owner, that's for my players, that's for next week's opponents, that's for the opponents we just played today. There's almost, when a manager does it well, he's speaking to a number of different people. And, often managers and players, but managers are often the spokesperson of a club. They're the person they're the face of the club in terms of not necessarily, the messages that get sent out, basically. He's got a lot of power to send out various messages and good messages, and it's a difficult part of it to get just right. I wasn't, always great at it by a long shot. There'd be some days that I'd walk away and, and think about what I just said, and I wish I hadn't have said that. And it's difficult in the heat of the battle, and that's where some mistakes get made. But it's really important.
I was going to say it's really seems to affect managers' positions, how they're perceived in the press.
Yes.
I mean, you can.
Powerful.
Yeah, I mean, what people say in their post-match interviews can often be dissected more than the game or the result. And it just has such a huge bearing, and it feels like there's a disconnect there, because surely the guy that coaches the team best should be the most sought after coach, but often it's not the case, is it?
Not always. No, that we're humans, and some people appeal to us more than others. And, there's various managers and coaches. Wayne Bennett's probably the most successful coach in rugby league history, and most definitely he is. And I think he's a very good coach. But he hasn't always had a great rapport with the press. He often gives one-word answers. Often doesn't do post-match interviews. his focus is mainly about his team, and he's probably got to a stage and status within his sport that he can get away with that. I think it's very difficult for a young manager starting out and having some of those sort of approaches, like somebody who's had a whole lot of success can afford to do some or take some of those sort of risks. I think nowadays, if somebody's too much like that too soon, they'd get vilified. They'd get crucified. Within the press, and it'd almost be suicidal in their position. So, but it is such an important, aspect of management and being the face, and it's the message. That's why, I always tried to have a little bit of space and time, if I could, between the end of the game and when I did an interview, so as to either calm down or get my thoughts, or have some consideration of what message I wanted to put out, either about the game or about the circumstances leading into the game, and once again, not excuse making, but, sometimes it was to protect your club, sometimes it was to protect your players, sometimes it was to protect your position, as well, and have people have some little understanding and insight into, what was going on within your game, but and within your club. But it's complex, it's complicated. It's I don't know whether you could do a degree on it, but it's certainly a big part of the psychology of that managers need to consider. And there's some of the things that I'm proud to say that the LMA do very well in terms of exposing up and coming managers to the importance of those aspects of management.
And you mentioned then about you take some time to think, and I want to be really careful that we don't encroach at all on anyone's private matters, and that we're very conscious we don't want it to be obvious who we're talking about at any time. But can you give me an example of some of the problems or the pressures that the managers you've spoken to have experienced recently? And as I say, there's no really don't want to encroach on anyone's privacy at all.
Yeah, it's not just problems, and sometimes it is. Listen, confidentiality is my priority, so I'll generalise for you, and that's all I'll do, Charlie. As much as I like you, but we just discuss issues and circumstances that arise, attitudes that arise. It's managing a group of young players and young people, and there's a lot of challenges in that, and particularly in football. There's a lot of distractions in football. There's a lot of very, very dedicated young men and who are fighting really hard for their careers, and then there's some people who are quite comfortable within their careers and probably aren't as committed as. But that goes for any sport and professional sport. They go through those sort of phases throughout their careers, and I get a chance to just sit down and talk about some of those sort of challenges and talk about their culture and how they like to improve it, and or how they are improving it. So it's not all just problems. It's just often it's just listening to somebody talk about what they're trying to achieve there and how they're going about it, and some of the questions that they sometimes raise about it to themselves. I haven't got the answers for them, but it just I'm sometimes an ear for them to listen to while they verbalise it, and it's just nice to be able to support people when they need a little bit of to listen to them, or sometimes a bit of advice if it's something of similar nature that somebody with more, with a few more years under their belt may well have experienced. And that's, so it isn't all just about help. It's a lot of them just like to talk, and like to talk about, and sometimes get some things off their chest. And but what I've found a big change in football and within that sport in the 18 years that I've been here. They're really keen to see how other sports handle some of their circumstances, and some of the challenges that they find they have in football. They're more open to looking out and looking at other sports and how they may well have dealt with things. So that's probably been the biggest, difference and transformation that I've seen. So, because I come from a different sport, often people will say, "Oh, do you have this issue in rugby league, or did you ever come across this, or how did you cope when you were in this sort of circumstance?" And so it's nice to be able to just give a different, different view from a different sport. And sometimes it's just we've had, we'd have the same problem, or no, not so much in our sport. It'd be more about this, and then so it's nice when you're in sport to be able to compare, and understand and actually listen to how things can be done differently, and then to see whether it can be applied to your sport or not. But often they are transferable. When you take away the shape of the ball or the size of the ball, or often the challenges are very, very similar.
What are the common threads that you find?
Oh well, within team sports, it's about culture and relationships, isn't it? Usually, and how well the team combines with each other, both on and off the field, in terms of are they pulling all in the same direction? They're always helping each other and trying to get the best, or that isn't always the case. Sometimes there's too much competition within the ranks, and sometimes there's suppression of abilities and capabilities of players in order to keep them in their spots, and so it isn't always ideal. You'd like to think that every team is pulling together in the right way, but that's it's complex. It's not always the case, and within teams there's always people who feel as though they should be in the team that aren't in the team, and all those issues. They're so common, and they cross over into every sport, but it's how it's handled, and sometimes there's some cultural differences within sports on how that's usually handled, and because there's so much transfer, and loan in football, it's a bit different too. If you're not in the team, some people want to go, quickly without fighting for it, and go to somewhere where they can get more opportunity, and understand that too. So some of them are unique, and some of them are, universal to team sports. Some of the obstacles that football managers certainly have to deal with, that's for sure.
I think some of them are universal to life. I remember hearing Tony Blair being interviewed,
Yes.
and he said that one time he rang up Sir Alex Ferguson and said, I've got this guy who's causing problems. I mean, it was pretty obvious he was talking about Gordon Brown, and apparently Alex Ferguson said to him, well, if I have players that cause problems, I sell them. And Tony Blair said, well, that's not really an option, to be honest.
I'm not sure Scotland were going to buy him back, were they?
No. No. Although we'd probably get a game for the rugby union team right now. Sorry, Scotland. Sorry. Oh, sorry, couldn't resist.
You said that, not me.
Yeah, couldn't resist. I know you're a busy man, I'll let you go, but just quickly, if someone's been listening to this conversation, in the unlikely event that coaching now appeals, after all they've heard, and what would you say to someone who wants to get into coaching, having all the experience you've had and now taught to new managers? What should they be preparing?
Certainly you need to know, enough about your sport. You need to be an expert of some degree of your sport. That's a necessity. That's an understanding of it, and both how it works and inside and out. That's important, but it's developing that relationships of people and with people. It's and how to manage people. And if there's any one thing that I tried to apply to my style of management, it wasn't always trying to you can't always be liked or in your position, but I certainly tried to be respected, and the only way to do that is by giving respect over in the first place. But the message that I probably first and foremost would give is manage people in the way that you would like to be managed yourself, and that's like the old saying about treat somebody as you would like them to treat you, and that's certainly the biggest thing. I think once you start treating people in a way that you wouldn't like to be treated yourself, I think you then soon get into difficulties within those relationships, and I think that's the big message that I try to put out to young coaches. That there's certainly when it comes time to either sacking people or not picking people, or deliver that message in a way that you would accept yourself. So you have to have usually some good rationale behind your decision making, and deliver it not as blunt as that would be offensive, that you would actually accept yourself. So it takes some skill to do those things. I'm talking about a couple of the negative aspects, Charlie, of what you've got to do there. But I'm also treat people in a decent manner in all aspects, not just the bad stuff, in all aspects. And I think you don't go too far wrong. But it is complex. Management isn't for everybody. Leadership isn't for everybody. It's not. It's something that needs to be really trained. It's got to be an interest. It's got to be a lifestyle, really. For a coach or manager to enter into it, it needs to be a passion. And the other beauty of coaching is there's a lot of different methods of doing it, in a different way. So, I've got some opinions on how it worked for me, but there's also contrasting styles of coaches and ways of coaching as well. So that is unique to various people, and I respect all aspects of it, as long as people do it in a decent and respectful manner.
Well, I suppose the interesting aspect of your job is that people think management, or people think the financial returns of management must be fantastic and everything else. And I suppose this chat, we've somewhat inevitably focused on the problems that managers have, because that's where you've got a unique insight. But to someone that wants to get into coaching, I guess you would say it's a wonderful way of life as well.
Oh, it's a great job. It's a fantastic part of somebody's life. Certainly in my life, I'm privileged to have done it and fulfilled some dreams, a lot of dreams and ambitions. Absolutely, but I think there's some misunderstanding about some of the financial side, and there's a lot of sacrifices made before you get anywhere near some way of good return. Most managers would tell you their journey, and they've made a lot of sacrifices to get there. And even nowadays, some managers aren't even in football on that great a wicket in terms of financial reward, because they're prepared to take jobs that because it's just hard to get back in on the ladder and get a job. So I think there's a bit of a misconception of a misunderstanding of some of the risk and reward at times. So it's I'm certainly not going to say that there isn't some benefits and some nice financial benefits, but I don't think that's the reason why many managers or coaches do the job. They do it for nothing, because they actually love it.
Yeah, do it for the passion.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, passion, and or it's a drive within them. So a very small part of it is to do with the financial reward, I'm sure.
Well, Tony, we'll let you go. As with when I came to Yorkshire in April, pleasure to speak, and a fascinating insight, and lovely to hear of someone that's got a lot out of coaching, putting something back in. So thank you for that, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Charlie. I look forward to you visiting in the winter months, and we'll show you the contrast up here in the hills.
I'll pack some warm clothing.
Good man.
Once again, massive thank you to Tony for the call and for opening up about a world that can often seem a bit closed off to the average sports fan. We're actually going to be catching up with a few previous guests over the next few months, interspersed with new guests too, of course, so if you've enjoyed a particular guest, you might well be hearing them back on here again before too long. That's all from us this week. We will be back next Sunday, so do join us then. As ever, I do have a small favour to ask in the meantime, and that's that you subscribe and leave us an iTunes review. It really does help us out. Enjoy your week, and I'll speak to you next Sunday.